discretion is advised.
Radio from the heart of America now.
And now, the Commander-in-Chief is back. Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.
All right, welcome Gulf Coast, and welcome back, America. From sea to shining sea and coast to coast, you are listening, of course, Freedom Friday, Carl Gallups. We're broadcasting live, 1330 WEBY, 25,000 watts of broadcast power. And, of course, we stream live over the internet, carlgallups.com, 1330weby.com, and we stream over your smartphone. Get the TuneIn Radio app. You can listen to us everywhere you take your smartphone and everywhere there is an internet connection. Plus, we podcast this show, and this is the show that you wait for every week. See, it wasn't that bad, was it? Just 100 and what since the last one? I mean, it really wasn't that bad. It goes by quickly. I know that most of you live for this day. For Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock Eastern Time is when we start, 4 o'clock Central Time. And I say that because we broadcast out of a Central Time zone. So that's what you're living for. And today's show is going to prove to be one that you will enjoy as much, if not more than any other. Because on the line is Mike Zullo, former lead investigator of the Obama fraud case under the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office under the direction of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Now, here's the thing, folks. I'm going to bring Mike on. I want him to do most of the talking because he's got the info and the insight. And I want to set it up just a little bit. Here's the thing. I don't believe, I mean, I could be wrong here, but I don't believe that you have anywhere nearly heard the last of all of this concerning the Obama birth certificate fraud case and its connection to the Sheriff Joe Arpaio criminal case in federal court out in Phoenix concerning, well, what they're trying to say is concerning Obama executive immigration orders and whether Sheriff Arpaio willfully refused to obey those orders, etc., contempt of court, all of that. But Mike Zullo has some amazing update. I mean, stuff that's just fresh, right, hot off the press, that he'll be giving you in a few moments on that. But folks, it's all tied together. It's all tied together, as proven by the court transcripts. It was brought up in court about the birth certificate, and that had no relation whatsoever, supposedly, to what the court had Arpaio there for. And, of course, Mike Zullo testified, and he took the Fifth Amendment a couple of hundred times, and he's going to explain why, and then he didn't take the Fifth, and he'll explain why, and then he talked, and he'll explain why and what he said and what all of that debacle was about, because all of that debacle kind of leads to where the thing is now before the Ninth District Court of Appeals and some other things. So Mike Zullo will tell you all that. We're going to make all of these connections. But right now, first let me just say hello, Mike Zullo. Are you on the line and ready to roll, my man?
Hello, Carl Gallups.
Okay, you're there. Good deal. Well, folks, listen, I'm just going to set this up, and then, Mike, after I say what I'm going to say, if I say anything wrong, of course, our deal has always been for years since we've been together on the radio, correct me. Correct me in front of everybody. I want to be as right as I can be, but I'm going to set this up, and then I'm going to turn you loose for as long as you want to go. And that is, folks, I want to tell you, first of all, as far as the birth certificate thing goes, it's my opinion, and I have a feeling you have not heard the last of this. Now, I can't promise you anything. I don't know anything with 100% certainty on exactly what's going to happen with this, but here's what I do know. As of now, right here on this radio program, for those of you that knew in your heart and soul, or believed in your heart and soul, that birth certificate that Obama posted, or, you know, when I say Obama, his administration, Obama didn't personally put it there, I'm sure. But when I say Obama, you know what I mean, his administration. When that birth certificate was placed there in 2011 at the ribbing and daring of Donald Trump, who wasn't even running for president back then, when that birth certificate was put there, and for those of you who knew and felt and believed that that thing just was not right, it was fraudulent, for those of you that did some research on your own with whatever means you had, and you arrived at conclusions for whatever reasons you arrived at them, that you believed that birth certificate somehow was a phony, it was a fake, it was a fraud. In the meantime, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, fourth largest sheriff's office in the nation, Mike Zullo, his lead investigator on this, they got involved, they got immersed for years and years. And then December of 2016, just a few months ago, before Arpaio went out of office, Mike Zullo, Sheriff Arpaio, held a press conference. You can see the whole thing. I will tell you where later. It's an hour long, wherein all of the evidence was presented that, and here's what I'm going to say, folks, you have been vindicated unequivocally. Unequivocally is the word. My tongue got tied. Unequivocally proves that the birth certificate on the White House website is a fabricated fraud. And let me just remind you, folks, the reason we know that is because there are a dozen elements that were lifted from one birth certificate of Johanna Anig, we're going to talk about that, and lifted over onto a template to recreate a birth certificate that Obama would claim as his own. And those elements and other factors have now been verified by two document examination entities, one in Italy, one in the United States. They have signed off on it with affidavits. I'm going to let Mike tell you the details of that, the extent of that, and they have said this is a fabricated fraud. Now, folks, that's the bottom line, and that's all Mike Zullo and Sheriff Arpaio ever promised that they could do under their jurisdiction and under their investigative arena, and that was to get to the bottom of whether this birth certificate was fraudulent or not, whether it was fabricated or not. They weren't trying to prove where he was born, and they haven't proven where he was born, and we can get into all of that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is, you quote, the birthers is what they tagged on anybody who dared to question the birth certificate. If you have ever questioned the authenticity of that birth certificate, you have been vindicated. It is not authentic. It is worthless. And it is a fabricated forgery, which is several levels of felonies. Now, where it'll go from there, Mike and I can't promise you. But I can tell you that as just several days ago, Mike was in contact with some important government officials that contacted him about it, and they had some meetings, and I imagine there will be more meetings in the future. Now, I'm not promising you, and Mike Zullo's not promising you what's going to happen, but even if no one ever hears it in some legal sense, you've been vindicated, because here's the deal. The burden of proof now, Mike Zullo, is on those who try to repudiate it. It's on them, because you've provided in a news conference with video evidence, with digital document expert evidence, with affidavit evidence, people can see it, that it is fraudulently fabricated. And now they have to prove somehow that it's not. And we're not talking about internet, we're not talking about internet jockeys that, that jump on their website and refute it because they don't like it. We're talking about people that will get affidavits, people that will employ document expert companies, people that will put the forensics together, a court to hear it and shoot it down. That's what we're talking about. And until that happens, and nobody's even dared to do that, Mike, the media won't even cover it because the evidence is so overwhelming. They won't discuss the evidence. So they've been vindicated, right, Mike Zullo? Let me shut up and you just talk from here.
No, Carl, you're exactly correct. There has been no bona fide forensics laboratory document examiner from the other side making a claim that they can prove irrefutably that the document is authentic and original, because you just can't. And there hasn't been anybody to expend the time, energy, and financial resources to get two document examiners from two different disciplines on two different continents, not known to each other, and come to the same conclusion through two different scientific methods to conclude the document has been fabricated piecemeal. There hasn't been anyone to come and refute that. And to your point that the news media won't discuss the findings, this is the most amazing thing to me. They go back to the first two press conferences, and because the media decided to claim, because of those, quote, keyboard jockeys that sit in their underwear in their mother's basement and want to throw out there that they're experts in some kind of field without any proof, credentials, anything, no method of operation to how they came to their conclusions, nobody to review it, didn't pay for any experts, come out and say, oh, we debunked this. The media latches onto that, and they call those findings debunked. Well, now when we did our last press conference last December, the media won't even discuss the findings. They go back to relying on a debunked investigation that was never debunked.
Right.
That's the game that's being played.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes they'll refer to the first two press conferences, which, by the way, had enough information and exposure to warrant a congressional hearing. Yeah, you never claimed that the first two press conferences were 100% of all the evidence that there was, but you had enough anomalies that back then you were calling for congressional investigation, and there should have been one. But sometimes what the media will do, they'll go back and they'll say, well, it's just more of the same. And what they're referring to are the first two press conferences, which, by the way, should have been heard by Congress. This last press conference wasn't anything like the first two press conferences in scope or depth or in the exact elements that were examined, right?
That's correct. And in the first two press conferences, we still had an expert. We had Reed Hayes, a document examiner, an expert, certified document examiner, court-recognized expert, supply us information in a report then, claiming the document was fabricated piecemeal.
Yeah.
The same Reed Hayes that we later used in December when we discovered more evidence, and then his word was vindicated by a forensics team over in Italy that did digital forensics, computer analyzation.
Right.
So I've got it on the best of both worlds.
Right.
And nobody in the media wants to take it up on the standing of the documentation provided by bona fide experts.
Right. And
they're afraid of it.
And that's my challenge to the media, to the OBOTs, to Congress, to the courts, to the Democrats, to the liberals, to the Obama administration. Prove that investigation wrong. And when I say prove, like Mike said, I don't mean get on the internet and say, oh, yeah, well, I don't think that matches up with this. And no, that doesn't prove anything. We're talking about hear the evidence, examine the evidence, get it before legal authorities. Go hire your own document experts that don't know that each other's working on it, and get a double-blind assessment of it. Pay tens of thousands of dollars for professional research like Zullo's folks did. Do that. Then take it before legal experts and have a legal rendering showing that this investigation is junk. And then I'll start listening to you. But until then, we're vindicated, and the proof of the burden of proof is on you. It's on you that say that there's nothing to it. Right, Mike?
100% correct. Carl, look, you get a lot of rantings from those, detractors on the left that they want us to supply the reports and the evidence and all this. Look, I didn't do it for them.
Right.
I don't answer to them. They are inconsequential to me. They are irrelevant as far as I am concerned,
right.
As irrelevant as that 7655 copier red herring they tried to throw out.
Right, right.
I'm not supplying any of my evidence to anybody else other than the United States Congressional Committee and or attorneys when some type of litigation is instituted.
Right.
Other than that, nobody's going to see what I have.
Right. Right. And what you have is astounding and amazing. And what you've released is amazing, but you have even more than that. And so anyway, listen, Mike, we've got to take a quick time out, but we've got a lot more to talk about. We're going to talk more about the birth certificate. I'm going to ask you about the ANI document and the authenticity of that and the questions that have been raised on that. And then we're going to get into the Arpaio trial, what's going on with that, where we are now, some amazing stuff happening, and the connections between it all, folks, because this is why I'm saying I believe that very soon you're going to hear some big stuff on this in the news about the Arpaio trial at least. But I can't imagine that somehow this whole birth certificate investigation, it won't come up in the same thing because they're both deeply, deeply related. And Mike Zullo will explain that in just a moment. All right, we're going to take a quick time out. We'll be back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
And now, the Commander-in-Chief is back. Freedom Friday with Carl Gallups, the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio.
All right, welcome back, Gulf Coast. Welcome back, America. Glad you're in the house. Mike Zullo is in the house, the former lead investigator of the Obama fraud case and fraud investigation, birth certificate fraud under Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Okay, so, Mike, here's the deal. So what we've said is that, the people who knew all along that somehow, or people who've been listening to us as we've been reporting on it for years, that knew that somehow this birth certificate was absolutely a fabrication, a fraud, resulting in felonious criminal activity around it. They have been vindicated by all of your work, by the forensic documents, by the forensic evidence, by the forensic document examiners on two different continents using two different methods, not even knowing that each other was working on it, came up to the same conclusion. It's all courtroom ready stuff. This is the kind of stuff you put people in prison for. And you've got it. It's been presented. It's archived. People can see it on the internet. And remind me, tell people where it is. But in the midst of it, the bottom line is, part of the evidence you have is you have one of the source documents for building that template. Both of these examiners looked at that document. It's the Johanna Ani birth certificate out of Hawaii that you came in possession of. And they looked at that, and they looked at the elements, how they were moved over perfectly, mathematically, all the angles, everything, the measurements, everything matches up. The type splatters, the ink splatters, I mean, the typeset, the pressure points, everything adds up that it was taken right from her document, put on a template, and presented as Obama's. Johanna Ani. So now people have said, well, you know, where did you get the Ani document? That must have been a stroke of luck to come up with it. And then the second thing is, well, what if her document is a fraud and Obama's document is correct and her document was created off of his? What do you say to those two arguments?
Well, first of all, Carl, the Ani document and the Obama document have already been analyzed, and the conclusion is drawn that elements from one are on the other.
Right.
And it's elements from the Ani document are transferred to the Obama document.
Right.
There's other evidence that we have that I did not disclose in the press conference that solidify that fact.
Yes.
But going to the argument now, the attack is on the credibility and authenticity of the Ani document.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how you want to slice this, because if they're trying to say the Ani document was a fabrication of the Obama, we have evidence that just annihilates that argument.
Yes, you do.
That just didn't happen. But you would have to ask yourself a question. Why would some individual fabricate her own birth certificate in order to protect what? Why would you do it?
Well, yeah.
There's no reason to do it.
Yeah, and not only that, I thought about this as you were speaking. So we know for a fact that Obama's document was because of what you have already presented publicly and plus stuff that you hold privately that you know about and I know about that absolutely proves that it was taken from her document and placed on the template to make his document. And so people are saying, well, what if her document's fake? And the answer to that is, what difference does it make? What if it is fake? It doesn't matter. That doesn't take away the fakeness of his. I guess that makes his document double fake, right?
You know what, the word fakeness, that just came to my mind as you were speaking. The fakeness of his is never going to go away.
Yeah.
And you have to also put into perspective the chain of events, the recorded statements in the media by officials in Hawaii who claim to see that document residing in the bound volume with 500 others, only later to have the then governor, Abercrombie, newly elected, want to settle the matter and goes on a pursuit for the document, and they can't find it. Well, what did it do? Get up and walk out of a bound volume?
Right.
It was never there to begin with.
Right. That's it. And folks, please hear me. You have been vindicated. And for the Obama bots out there that are screaming at the radio now, all I can say to you is deal with it. Deal with it. I mean, prove it. Prove otherwise. In a court of law, not just get on the internet and say you don't like it or you found something that you don't think matches up. That doesn't prove anything. Mike Zullo, Sheriff Arpaio, two digital document experts, they have proven that the Ani document was used to create a template from the ground up. And they've also said, Mike, that the Ani document probably isn't the only document that was used. There probably were other documents used. But we know the Ani document, 10 or 12 elements were lifted from it and put over onto the template, right?
That's correct. And another point, Carl, the one thing you can take to the bank, we know for a fact that the Ani long-form birth certificate is, in fact, in possession of the Department of Health in Hawaii because Johanna Ani got it years before this issue ever came up.
Yeah.
So how easy is this? Just produce another long form out of Department of Health in Hawaii, and it will match exactly to the document we have, which is an authenticated document, and the same manifestations will appear on the Obama document. It's so simple to prove.
Right. Right, absolutely. And for those that are listening, say, well, what are you guys going to do about this? Well, Mike Zullo has done everything he promised he would do. Now, what you got to ask is, what's your congressman going to do about this? You see, that's the key. And I'm telling you, you're going to run into buzzsaws because the congressmen that were in office for 8 years, when all this was going on, and Arpaio and Zullo were screaming at Congress and the FBI and the Department of Justice and everybody else saying there is a massive fraud that has taken place on the part of the American people, those same congressmen are still in office. They are complicit in this cover-up. And I'm not saying every congressman covered it up, but by either taking no action or knowing that action should have been taken and then refused to, they're complicit. Do you agree with that, Mike Zullo? I hear the music.
I agree, and they're complicit in a lot of other things. Just look at what's being exposed and unfolding now.
Yeah.
What went on in that administration.
Yeah. Draining the swamp's a big deal, folks, and it may take a long time. The birth certificate, I think, and Mike Zullo thinks, is the foundation of it all, because that's where a guy used fake ID to command the American military, Congress, and our economy and our borders. That's why Sheriff Arpaio is going through what he's going through, because he was the only lawman with Mike Zullo that had the guts to look at it and to expose to the American people. Now it's been exposed. And my challenge to the Obots that are listening and all the Democrat operatives, the burden's on you, and you can't prove it otherwise. If you can, how about doing it? Let's have a trial. Yeah, let's have a hearing. We'll be back after this timeout. More of Mike Zullo. House.
Yes, I am.
All right, good deal. Let's just jump right back into this. And so, folks, Mike Zullo, of course, the former lead investigator for the Barack Obama fraud birth certificate case under Sheriff Joe Arpaio and the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, the fourth largest sheriff's office in the nation. Several years of criminal investigation, two different digital document expert entities using two different sciences on two different continents, neither one aware that the other one was involved in the case. They both came to the very same conclusion that the Johanna document used to build and to fabricate Barack Obama's template document from the ground up. The thing is a fraud, and therefore there have been multiple felonies committed by somebody in the Obama administration, and whether or not Barack Obama's culpable or not himself, that would be up to judges and courts. But the bottom line is there's enough evidence now, forensic evidence, courtroom-ready evidence, to be heard by a court, to be heard by congressional investigation, to be heard by federal law enforcement, and so far, crickets. But as far as something have happened today, but not really, because there are many people that now know about this and many people that are involved. And as I said just a few days ago, several government officials contacted Mike Zullo, and we can't promise you what's going to happen from it, but I'm just saying people are still interested, people are still talking about it at the federal level, and Mike Zullo's not going away, and I'm not going away, and Sheriff Arpaio's not going away on this issue. Now, in the meantime, Mike, I got to ask you, so several weeks ago, the largest newspaper in Arizona, and they were running an interview on the Arpaio trial and your involvement in it, and Dennis Montgomery and various NSA workers, CIA workers that developed the spy software. One of them, Kirk WEBY, I had on my show it was last week, I think. And so they ran this interview, and they called you, or they ran this article. They called you for an interview, and you refused to give an interview with them. Why don't you tell our listeners why, and some of the junk that you've put up with from that publication and others and people involved with it?
Well, the short answer is there's no point to giving these people an interview because they never report what you say.
Well, they're fake. You mean they're fake news?
Oh, fake news with a capital F and a capital N. I mean, it's fake news. It's never reported as to how you say it. When they get information from you that doesn't work along the lines of the theme of their story, they'll run out and they'll get, for example, there's a gentleman that is, basically an internet stalker of me, and they'll use this individual as a creditable source. Mm-hmm. This is an individual who had a very brief stint with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, has no true law enforcement experience in his background. As a matter of fact, was fired from a volunteer law enforcement position years ago, was under investigation, was relieved of his badge and gun, and ultimately fired for a truthfulness issue, was under investigation for sexual harassment while he was there. An individual whose background is just sordid. I could go on forever. Mm-hmm. But they'll prop this guy up as if he's some authority on the sheriff, some authority on the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, some authority on the birth certificate investigation, and some authority on me.
And wasn't he released?
Well, let me ask you.
Wasn't he released from his duties at Maricopa County Sheriff's Office as well?
Actually, he was going to be, and he quit before that was going to happen.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll ask you, Carl, and especially the business that you're in now as a profession, if you know somebody for 8 weeks, if you've been in a position of employment for 8 weeks, how much of that corporation would you know about?
Yeah.
Nothing.
8
weeks.
Zero.
You don't know anything.
Yeah.
All right? So they will constantly defer to this individual as some type of authority. There is no reason for me to give any credibility to that kind of procedure, that lack of integrity.
Yeah.
I just simply will not answer it.
Yeah. I've read articles from that same newspaper, and I've answered people who've asked questions on our sites, Facebook sites and our blog sites, about that. Well, why don't you talk about that? Well, why didn't you quote that? And my answer has been, why would I quote them? They're very seldom completely correct. They might get a few things correct. They might go quote some court documents and stuff and say, well, see, we quoted the court documents. How can we be wrong? But it's just like you said. They'll do an interview with you and not say what you said, or they won't put it in the proper context. And then they'll use people like the guy you're talking about that has all of these problems that you've just talked about, and they'll use him as the authority and try to make it look like you're the idiot when really it's the other way around. So why would I even respond to them? Why would I even acknowledge them?
This is the most incredible thing regarding that article that was written. It has to do with the civil federal trial, the Montgomery investigation that took place in Seattle. And what your audience needs to understand is, yes, I took the Fifth Amendment for 200, and I thought it was 80 questions or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But the reason behind that was there was a threat in one of the motions made by the ACLU that myself and others should be investigated and prosecuted for espionage.
Uh-huh.
At that point in time, the county attorney's office, the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors would not provide me legal counsel.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the judge and petitioned. I didn't want to testify because I was at risk. The judge didn't care. He basically told me on record that he's not pursuing me, but the federal government might.
And didn't he say something? Didn't he say something along the lines that things that you said could be used against you that way?
I don't know if he said that, but the inference is that the federal government is sitting right in this trial.
Yeah.
And I want your audience to understand, I wasn't overly concerned about espionage, but the fact is this is a ginned-up case by the ACLU.
Right.
And evidence that was presented, I had an idea of what they were going to do because I was ordered to a deposition, which I took the Fifth and sat there for 6 hours while they asked me question after question, and I could see exactly what they were doing.
Right. And you had no attorney?
No, I had no attorney. And you're not, as law enforcement, you're not trained on how to take the Fifth. You're trained to testify.
Right.
Well, I threw everything I ever learned about testimony out the window that day because the only thing I was concerned with is I was going to get the truth of this investigation out and on record.
Right.
And the questions that I was asked, the evidence that was put forth by the ACLU and their attorneys was cherry-picked evidence to go along the theme that they wanted to convince this court that Arpaio investigated him.
Right. The judge.
Investigated the judge.
Right.
Yes. And I'm telling you, I know the evidence. I turned over 3,000 documents. There is evidence that they never put forward. They never released to the public. They took evidence out of context, and they're peppering this question after question. And every time it was a strong point that I didn't want to answer, they were asking the judge to consider my non-answer as being to their affirmative by inference, which you can do in a civil proceeding.
Mm-hmm.
So I waited, and I waited for the ACLU to rest, which means they can no longer go back and ask me anything that they asked me before unless I open it up in testimony. And at that point in time, I waited for Arpaio's counsel to come up and ask me a question. I waited for the redirect, and at that point in time, I said, and I think my words were, nobody did this.
Right.
and I went through the investigation.
Right.
I wasn't going to be led down no primrose path by these people. I had no attorney. I had nobody putting up contrary evidence. I had nobody putting up the truth. I just sat there and I endured it until I couldn't take it anymore.
Right.
So what is ever in my testimony is the truth that has gone on in that investigation.
Right.
And what's being misrepresented is this notion that the information and all the information Montgomery gave us was garbage. Well, I actually testified to the contrary and said there was some information that did prove out.
Right.
And they kind of disregard those statements, and they take now email snippets where different parts of time, over a 2-year investigation, this is different time segments that were corresponding through emails, but it's about things that are happening in that moment.
Right.
Not going all the way back to the beginning.
Right.
With information that he gave us. And I can tell you this about Mr. Montgomery. There are things that Dennis Montgomery told myself and Detective Makowitz that are turning out to be true today.
Right.
There would be no way for him to have that knowledge unless he was there.
Right.
There was information he gave us.
Years ago.
I referenced, I think, in Alex Jones, information he referenced about attorney-client breach,
mm-hmm.
that information was being collected, eavesdropping information.
Mm-hmm.
And Edward Snowden, about 2-3 months after Montgomery alerted to this, it was released in one of the...
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's no way Montgomery could have known this unless he was there when it happened.
Right. Right. I get it. and you know,
it's a lot.
I know, and of course that's that's one of the other reasons why you didn't give an interview to that, and I'm going to call it, this is that rag in Arizona, because they're not going to get this right. They're not going to put the proper timeline in order or the context. They proved it from the article they just wrote. They went back and cherry picked from emails, and because you didn't give a testimony, they just kind of made it what they wanted it to be.
Well, Carl, it's the same thing they do with the birth certificate. Nobody wants to talk about the real evidence. They just want to talk about it and make it what they want.
Right.
I'm not interested in that. And that's what's going on in the media throughout the country.
Right.
You see it. You see it all over the place.
Yeah, I know. The leftists are having riots over Donald Trump releasing his tax records. But the media won't cover the fact that the last guy that was in office doesn't even have proper identification. In fact, 4 or 5 felonies were committed in trying to identify him, and they're crickets on that. They won't even talk about that. But they'll riot in the streets about tax returns from Donald Trump.
No, and you have a patently fake dossier that is now being touted as evidence that was utilized by the FBI to get a wiretap on somebody in the campaign of Donald Trump before he became president-elect.
Right.
I mean, this is garbage information, and they're using it to get warrants,
right.
to tap telephones,
right.
to grab emails. I mean, where are we going in this country?
I know. And so, listen, in the next couple of minutes, we're going to take a break. Not right now, but in just a couple of minutes, we will. When we come back, I want you to give the very latest information on the Arpaio trial case, because that's huge. And where it is now and some of the surprising turns and twists that it's taking, this could prove to be very serious for the federal government, very serious for the ACLU, very serious for the Department of Justice, very serious for some judges. This is some pretty big stuff, and I'm going to get you to tell the folks about all of that when we come back from the break. But before we go to the break, let me say one more time, Mike Zullo. First of all, let me tell everybody where they can find an archive of the 1-hour press conference you did, and then the 7-minute video evidence that was presented in that press conference, and then a 3-minute video synopsis of the whole thing, so that they just want to get somebody to say, look, take 3 minutes and watch this. It's powerful. I mean, you see it with your own eyes. Just go to carlgallups.com/Obama fraud. That's it, carlgallups.com/Obama fraud. And if you can't remember that, just go to carlgallups.com. And on the landing page, you'll see a link that's in yellow. You can't miss it. It's right under my picture that says Obama fraud case files. Click on that, and then there the videos are, and you can send them anywhere you want. And the 1-hour press conference video was filmed by a Fox News affiliate in Arizona. It's over an hour. It's a major media source, and that video is still up. But Mike Zullo, I'm just going to say, the people that believe that the birth certificate was a fraud, they're vindicated. And I'm going to challenge the naysayers again. Do something about it. Let's have a hearing. Let's have a trial. Let's examine it on its evidence before legal authorities. That's all you've ever wanted. You've done what you promised, Mike. Now, Congress, FBI, somebody, Department of Justice, somebody needs to step up and do their job. Right, Mike?
They do. And, Carl, if that document ever proved to be authentic during the course of my investigation, I would have came out and said so.
Yeah.
It just simply isn't. It's a fabrication.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's take this break, and then I want you to come back and give us the latest on Arpaio's trial. Folks, you're listening Freedom Friday. Carl Gallups, Oval Office, Gulf Coast Talk Radio. Mike Zullo, my guest. We'll be right back after this timeout. Don't go anywhere. All right, welcome back, Gulf Coast. Welcome back, America. Yes, you are in the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio, and so is Mike Zullo, former lead investigator of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, under the Obama fraud birth certificate investigation case. Mike Zullo, good to have you with us, folks. Go to carlgallups.com, click on the yellow link. You'll see it. You can see all of the video verification evidence and so much more there about what we're talking about. So, Mike, I'm going to hush. You bring us up on the Sheriff Arpaio case, what's going on, what the very latest is, and why this thing is probably getting ready to go really big.
Yeah, Carl, if your audience follows it or if they remember, the government, the DOJ, brought criminal charges of contempt against Sheriff Arpaio approximately 2 weeks before the general election for his now 7th term was going to commence. Mm-hmm. That, coupled with an influx of cash into his competitor's campaign by George Soros-affiliated groups, mm-hmm. was enough to unseat the sheriff. The sheriff now is embattled, and he is obviously pleading not guilty to criminal contempt. And as fate would have it, he changed lawyers and got a new lawyer by the name of Mark Goldman. As Mr. Goldman was reviewing the case, he came to the conclusion that the DOJ has charged Sheriff Arpaio under an erroneous statute.
Yeah.
It would be U.S. Title 18-401. That carries a statute of limitations of up to 5 years. Mm-hmm. There's another congruent statute, 402, that 3 other defendants for the same criminal contempt charge in the same court were relieved of prosecution because a 1-year statute of limitations had expired. So let me put this together for you. The DOJ was well aware that the statute 402 they could not charge Arpaio under because the 1-year statute of limitations had lapsed.
It was gone, yeah.
They charged him under 401. Here is under 401. This could only be utilized if it was the United States or the government bringing the initial prosecution or action that resulted in that criminal contempt.
Right.
It can't be utilized. The fact of the matter is, what Arpaio was originally embattled over in the original civil proceeding was never being brought by the government. It was being brought by private parties, the ACLU and private law firms, not the federal government.
Right.
So the problem for the then administration was, if they wanted to get Arpaio blown out of his seat as sheriff, they were going to charge him, which is something they never do before an election period. They needed a statute to charge him, and they could not use the correct statute. They ginned this up and used the wrong statute.
Hoping that nobody would know, or hoping that Hillary would go in and nobody would ever find out?
Well, hoping nobody would know, or even if they were found out, the damage would have been done.
Right.
Because the election would have been over before anybody figured it out. And he would have been out, and they would have said, oops, we're sorry, our bad, and we're going to all go home.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the way it's unfolding. So as it stands right now, there is an emergency motion before the Ninth Circuit asking that this case be dismissed for that and other areas that need to be looked at. Mm-hmm. And in a very strange move, the Ninth Circuit has now set forth an order, and it is instructing the DOJ and the judge who is presiding over this at this point, they need to answer within 14 days the questions that have been raised in this emergency motion for dismissal.
And that's huge.
That's huge.
Because now we
because
got
basically what they're saying is you better explain to us how you did this.
Right. And now we've got a new DOJ, a new president, and I just know Jeff Sessions is not going to try to cover up the unethical / illegal activities of the prior administration. He's not going to do it.
No, this is all ginned up. And to make matters worse, the original proceeding that this is all stemmed from is already in appeal before the Ninth Circuit for numerous violations by that presiding judge.
Right.
So here's kind of like a situation where if the original thing gets overturned at a later date, but Arpaio was still ginned up under this complaint and stands trial and is found guilty, but the original case gets dismissed, well, then in theory, this contempt trial would never have occurred because the whole original matter has been vacated.
Right.
It would be like it never happened.
Right. Right.
It is such a spider web of technicalities and intricacies that it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And one more point.
Go ahead.
This has cost the taxpayer of Maricopa County $50 million. And everybody wants to blame Arpaio. It's not Arpaio.
Right.
It's the judge involved in this that allows this to go forward. $50 million the taxpayer not only pays for the defense of Arpaio, but they also pay for the prosecution of Arpaio.
Right.
Out of the same checkbook.
Right. And Mike, listen, we've got 30 seconds, and I'm just going to say this. And now we know, because it came up in trial, that a lot of it was about the birth certificate. And Arpaio has said that. He's been on record saying that, and he believes that because it was brought up. The birth certificate was brought up. That wasn't even apropos to the case. Dennis Montgomery was brought up and outed by the court, and that wasn't even apropos to the case. So this is a stinking mess. I have a feeling we're going to hear a lot more about all of this in the weeks and months to come. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, I think so. I mean, this was just political retribution and politicizing the DOJ to do it.
Yep, absolutely. All about the birth certificate. Folks, we'll be back after this time out. Don't go anywhere.